Happy New Year everyone, and welcome to the first video on the channel this year. I've been pretty busy the past few months, but I'm hoping to be able to upload more this year. Still got lots of big ideas that I want to make a reality. So, the Sydney Metro extension from Chatswood to Sydenham. It's been a resounding success. I've ridden it many times, a lot more than before it was extended, and I think that says it all. Now that it removes the need to transfer at Chatswood, it provides a faster, easier, and more frequent journey from Sydney's northwest to the city. In today's video, I want to perform a retrospective on the Sydney Metro, what was done right, what was done wrong, and how the Sydney Metro has changed Sydney. More importantly, we'll discuss upcoming projects, and finally what the government should be building next. I'm Shareth, and welcome to Building Beautifully. Before I continue, massive shout out to my monthly Ko-fi supporters. Please do consider supporting me over on Ko-fi if you can. Also, please subscribe if you haven't already, and after the video, be sure to check out the rest of Building Beautifully, where I discover Sydney one story at a time. Comparing the month before the Metro's extension opened to after, the Metro's patronage went up by 3.33 million passengers, or 156%. The stations in the CBD, like Martin Place and Gadigal, have been the most successful. Barangaroo and Crow's Nest are middle of the road, while Waterloo is easily the quietest of the new stations, with even less patronage than Tallawong. This, however, will most likely change when developments in the area finish construction. There's just not a whole lot there right now. For more granular information, I compared station data from the 3 months before the Sydney Metro opened with the 3 months after it opened. Martin Place and Sydenham both almost doubled in patronage, which frankly is insane, but not surprising given new Metro platforms opened at both stations. The Sydney Metro Northwest stations, opened since 2019, saw increases in patronage ranging from 20 to 40%. Quite sizable. Epping and Central didn't go up by quite as much, but this is just proportionally. Epping saw a greater absolute value of passenger growth than stations like Bella Vista and Kellyville, and Central was greater than every station in the Northwest. When we look at absolute passenger growth, one train station suddenly pops up as having seen a large growth in passengers, and that's Bondi Junction, having seen more new passengers than over half of the Sydney Metro Northwest stations, although that only reflects a 9% increase. This is probably because commuters are making the most of the transfer between the T4 and the Metro now available at Martin Place. Okay, which stations fell in usage the most? Obviously the Bankstown Line stations that closed on the last day of September as part of the next stage of the Metro. But other than these, North Sydney stands out most prominently, falling by 43%. Mostly because Victoria Cross is so nearby. This represents a resounding success, because one of the main reasons a station was built here was to alleviate congestion at North Sydney Station. St Leonard's near Crow's Nest also saw a fall, as did Wollstonecraft and Waverton to lesser extents. Moving into the CBD, we see that Wynyard has gone down by 22%, with its role of serving businesses in the northern part of the CBD now very well supplemented by Martin Place. Nearby Circular Quay is also down by 10%. Similarly, Town Hall has gone down by 16%, meaning Gadigal is doing a good job at alleviating congestion there. Nearby Museum and St James have also gone down, but by only 10%, perhaps as former T3 commuters are now getting off at Gadigal. Redfern near Waterloo and St Peters near Sydenham are both down by roughly 10%. This is all to say the Sydney Metro has successfully redirected patronage from busy train stations into new, larger and more frequently serviced metro stations. But if we look at the stats closely, it's done so through redistribution and growth, not just redistribution. Roughly 6 million more trips were made on both Sydney Trains and Sydney Metro in the 3 months after the Metro opened, representing an increase of 4%. Considering Sydney actually lost a train line in that time, I think it's pretty impressive we saw a growth in patronage. So, why did 6 million more people catch rail in Sydney after the Metro opened? Anyone who's used the Metro will probably know the answer to that. It's just so frequent, showing up every 4 minutes in the peak, every 5 minutes in the interpeak, and every 10 minutes in the early mornings, late evenings, and on weekends. The Sydney Metro's success honestly seems to be best reflected by taking it late at night. I've been on it a few times around 11 at night, and it's honestly just as busy as it is in the middle of the day. Okay, it's running half as frequently at night, so I guess there's half as many people using it, but if you ask me, only half as many isn't even that bad for 11 at night in a city where the average person sleeps at like 8 PM. The point is, the Sydney Metro insists on believing people in this city want to travel at all times of the day for both city-bound and inter-suburban journeys, and its faith in us has been rewarded by strong patronage. Shops are slowly opening up at and around different stations, but the one at Victoria Cross has emerged as my favourite. A few months ago, I lined up for nearly 40 minutes just for a banh mi at Marrickville pork roll. Funnily enough, you'll soon be able to take a metro between the two locations. I admit I haven't been back in a few months, but the new plaza was bustling and alive, and the vibes were just great. The Sydney Metro is far from perfect. Let's discuss some of its issues. Number 1, development. While new apartments at some stations like Hills Showground and Tallawong have already opened, other stations are still surrounded by empty land over 5 years after the first stage opened. Progress on new housing around stations in the hills, such as Kellyville, Bella Vista and Cherrybrook, appears to have still gone nowhere. Kellyville and Bella Vista were recently rezoned for 4,600 new homes, so that's good news. Except the original figure was for 20,700 new homes. Glenwood and Stanhope Gardens near both stations were originally included in the plans, but ultimately excluded, which I fear may be the fault of Federal Labor MP Michelle Rowland, who campaigned for their exclusion. I guess she just doesn't care about the housing crisis. But whatever. Get some shovels in the ground and get something built around all of these stations so that more people can benefit from this incredibly fast, game-changing metro. Number 2, car parks and buses. Now, car parks aren't innately problematic. The metro has been built in an incredibly suburban, car-dependent area, that is, the hills, so car parks are to an extent a necessary evil. But often, driving is truly the only valid way to get to many of these stations. For example, the 626 bus acts as one of the feeder buses for residents of Cherrybrook, but only runs every half an hour off-peak and every 15 minutes on-peak. With the metro running every 4 minutes on-peak and every 5 minutes off-peak, this just isn't good enough, and represents an apparent assumption that most people will just drive to the metro. Give people options. Make buses more frequent. I'd recommend a trial of on-demand buses that will allow people to get to the metro station at any time without needing to worry about not finding parking at the station. Number 3, stop spacing. I recently went overseas to Toronto and rode the Toronto subway. I'll be making a video about that, stay tuned. But their subway is basically what the Sydney Metro is trying to be, with one key exception. The Toronto subway actually has appropriate stop spacings. Toronto's average station spacing is 1 kilometre, whereas Sydney's is 2.5 kilometres, with the greatest distance being 6 kilometres. Having such spare stations reduces the metro catchment severely and increases the need for users to drive to their local station. Sure, it would make the journey slower to have more stations, but it would benefit more people. Toronto understands this because even their new upcoming Ontario line will have stop spacings averaging 1 kilometre. It'll cost a pretty penny, but it'll be worth it in the long run. It's too late to fix this now for Sydney, but let's remember it for future Sydney Metro projects. And that segues us perfectly into our next topic. What's actually next for the Sydney Metro? Later this year, the Sydney Metro Southwest is expected to open. This will extend the current Sydney Metro from Sydenham to its final terminus in Bankstown. Once this project opens, I expect we'll see an even greater bump in Sydney Metro patronage. Hopefully it does open in 2025, but we'll have to wait and see. Following that, the Sydney Metro Western Sydney Airport from St Mary's to Bradfield is expected to open in late 2026. That will allow commuters to get to and from the new Western Sydney Airport, but it seems unlikely it will open in time for the airport's opening, which should be in early 2026. That's far from the line's biggest problem though, with a route that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I've already discussed that in a different video. After 3 metro openings 3 years in a row, it's a shame we'll have to wait another 6 years for the next project, the Sydney Metro West, opening in 2032. With that said, I do believe it will be worth the wait. The Sydney Metro West will run from Hunter Street to Westmead, greatly improving capacity between Parramatta and Sydney CBD, and creating new sites for excellent transit-oriented development. I've also made a video on this line's problems, which largely relates to my earlier criticism: not enough stations. The Minns government vowed a while ago to add 2 stations between Sydney Olympic Park and Parramatta. One at Rosehill and the other one most likely at Silverwater. Unfortunately, neither station has been confirmed yet, and even if they are, it will be incredibly expensive to add them both. I'm completely guessing here, but it's likely it'd be in the neighbourhood of $3 billion for both stations, if it's even possible to add them at a later stage. Now, I was actually lucky enough to be invited to visit the future Hunter Street station box on the 22nd of January 2025. And even better, I got to speak with a very special person.
So I'm here with Joe Halen, the Minister for Transport. Is this really exciting?
It's incredible, isn't it? Such a huge cabin, 20 metres high, 28 wide, 180 metres long, and giant space.
It's like honestly impressive how huge it is, and it's going to link the mountain place, so it's going to make it easier to travel around the city, right?
That's right. In fact, we saw today the pedestrian access that will come from Hunter Street, just under this intersection here, straight into Martin Place. In fact, when you get off the metro there, you see that wall when you come out of the gate line. That's where it's going to come through and connect.
It's so seamless, isn't it? And this is going to make it much easier for people in West Sydney to get around.
That's right. It's going to double the rail capacity between our CBDs, between the city and Parramatta, and then of course onto Westmead.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. Thank you so much for taking
Thank you so much.
After that, what should come next? In September 2024, a secret report was obtained by the Sydney Morning Herald, which made proposals for 6 different metro and railway projects. A business case study has been promised for a line from St Mary's to Schofields and on to Tallawong, which I support. The secret report suggests that this will cost $12.8 billion, proposing it open in 2039. This line would pass through Marsden Park, a suburban development on Sydney's outskirts that desperately needs better public transport links. It would also finally link the Sydney Metro Northwest to Schofields, allowing residents to more readily get between places along the T1, such as Riverstone, Blacktown and Parramatta, to places along the Metro like Rouse Hill, Castle Hill, Epping and Macquarie Park. Honestly, it's mind-boggling that this link doesn't already exist. Now, rather inexplicably, the Western Sydney Airport Metro has different rail car lengths and electrification standards to the Sydney Metro Northwest, meaning the lines can't be continuous. A transfer will be needed. I'd recommend this takes place at Schofields via a cross-platform interchange, allowing commuters to just cross the platform instead of walking for ages. An extension of the airport metro from Bradfield to Macarthur is also on the cards, with stops in Oran Park and Narellan. It won't actually be the first time Narellan has had a railway station. Check out my video on the Camden line in the top right to find out more. Oran Park is, in most respects, the Marsden Park of the Southwest, and desperately needs better public transport, so this metro will be a welcome project. When it comes to both these projects, I'd urge the government to build them both above ground, as they largely run through undeveloped areas. Tunnelling will always be more expensive than building above ground, money that we largely don't have to waste. The secret report suggests building this just to Oran Park will cost $7.4 billion, with an opening in 2047. Wait, 2047? What? That's insane! I really think they should be building this one much earlier. The site's just sitting empty right now. Extending the metro to Glenfield has previously been on the cards, but I'd really recommend this be done as a heavy rail extension of the Southwest Rail Link, rather than a metro conversion project. That would allow Tier 2 or potentially even Tier 8 services to run from the city to the new airport, and better link suburbs in Sydney's southwest, like Cabramatta and Liverpool, to the new airport. Sadly, no provisions have been made for extending a heavy rail line to the new airport, so a transfer would likely be needed at Bradfield Station, where provisions have been made, or at Bradfield South, as the proposal suggests, with a price tag of $4.6 billion and an opening in 2033. These are the only projects with business case studies currently under development, although I'm honestly not sure what stage those studies are at currently. The report mentions one other metro extension, which doesn't have a business case study attached to it currently, suggesting the Sydney Metro West extend easterly to Zetland and 2 other locations, King Street North and either Elizabeth Street or Haymarket, at a cost of $9.3 billion and an opening in 2042. I think they should probably send this one even further, to stations at UNSW, Kingsford, Maroubra and perhaps even La Perouse. This wouldn't be as high a priority for me, however, given that the area already has light rail, which, by the way, really should be extended beyond Kingsford. The projects I've just listed appear to be the most present on the government's radar, and even their construction is sadly far from guaranteed. But if you put me in charge for a day, what would I build? Well, I'd build everything I just said, but I'd also extend the Sydney Metro West westerly to the new airport, providing better links between the new airport, southwestern Sydney, Parramatta and Sydney CBD. This line would likely become the primary east-west spine of Sydney. There's some other basic projects I'd like to see that I've proposed in the past. An extension of the Southwest Metro to Liverpool would be brilliant, given Liverpool is the only major city centre in Sydney that doesn't get express trains to the CBD. It could perhaps go beyond to the new airport too, although I believe a simple extension of the Southwest Rail Link would be more cost effective.
It would be remiss not to mention that provisions at Bankstown Metro Station for a future extension west towards Liverpool are very poor, and would most likely involve the need to reconstruct the entire metro station underground. So this project is disappointingly unlikely.
A Victoria Road metro line would also make a lot of sense, and a metro from Parramatta to Epping via Carlingford would finally close the uncrossable zone. Although I still assert that extending the Parramatta Light Rail to Macquarie Park via Eastwood would be easier, cheaper and yet still effective. However, there is one proposal that I'd like to finish the video with. It's one I've made a lot in the past, but it's also one that I'd like to more definitively emphasize, out of a hope that maybe I can convince the transport planners, politicians and visionaries of tomorrow to build it. Currently, Melbourne is building the Suburban Rail Loop, a gargantuan 90-kilometre railway valued at $58 billion that will link every train line in Melbourne. It'll be the city's first ever circumferential railway. That is, if they manage to build the entire thing, and represents a focus on inter-suburban journeys rather than journeys to and from the CBD, which reflected a past emphasis on public transport purely existing for workers getting to the city, rather than recreational usage at all hours of the day and days of the week. The Suburban Rail Loop isn't perfect, but it represents a step in the right direction. When and if the Sydney Metro Western Sydney Airport is extended to Tallawong and Macarthur, it will also be circumferential, but too far out from the city. Something closer to the city is needed. I'm going to call it the Inner Orbital Line. In the past, I've proposed a line from Norwest to Cogra and from Macquarie Park to Hurstville, both adapted from government proposals. But truthfully, it doesn't matter where the line starts and ends. Instead, I've formulated 2 key requirements for this line. First, it must go to Parramatta. And second, it must interchange with every radial railway line in Sydney. Not only will these 2 requirements ensure that the widest catchment of passengers are serviced, but it will best link everyone in Sydney to Parramatta, Sydney's future second CBD. The Inner Orbital Line will end the need to travel through Central to get pretty much anywhere in Sydney. Previously, someone from Hurstville would need to go all the way into Central and then all the way back out again to get to Parramatta. Now, that could be just one train. Previously, someone from Harris Park would need to go all the way to Central and then all the way back up to get to Chatswood. Now, they can just go to Parramatta, head up the Inner Orbital Line to the Sydney Metro Northwest, and then take that to Chatswood instead. I guess my point here is that the Sydney Metro in its current form is far from enough, even when projects currently being built are complete. That secret report I mentioned earlier recommends a $3 to $4 billion investment in the Sydney Metro every year to keep the system expanding and better serving more and more of Sydney. I couldn't agree more. Of course, literally a day after that article came out, the Housing Commissioner suggested we do the opposite and spend far less on the Metro because the Metro is diverting resources from home building to public infrastructure projects. My view on this is probably predictable. Both are important, and the government needs to figure out a way to build both transport and housing, not one at the expense of the other. Anyways, that's today's video basically done. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.